Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time, Trope Talk Pinocchio Plots, the newest Trope Talk as of recording this. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. And the Kickstarter is now ended, but if you did check out the my writing that I posted for free in the Kickstarter, if you read it, tell me what you thought of the prologue and the first 5 chapters that I uploaded for free. Um, of course, those are not representative of what the final product could end up becoming. They are just essentially the product that I was able to do and edit all on my own without any other eyes looking in on the project, right? So that's just only having me as an editor in it because I cannot afford my own editor. Um, so, anyways, yeah. Pinocchio plots, though, are. I had to look this up. It was a little hard to find. There really wasn't much writing about it, but I found a Quora question and answer. And essentially, this is just like, I want to be a real boy. And a lot of the time, you see this a lot in science fiction with robots. It tends to be really the only uh, plot device used for robots and artificial intelligence is that I want to be a real boy. I want sentience or whatever. Very basic, kind of overused, but I am curious if Red is going to twist this and bring up other examples that maybe fit this that I did not know of before. Let's dive in.
One of my favorite quirks of human.
Which also, because this tends to be more of a science fiction plot, you don't really see this in fantasy, I feel like. I can't think of any fantasy examples off the top of my head with the definition of Pinocchio plots that I am aware of. So, probably not going to be able to speak too much on this plot.
Humanity is our rampant anthropomorphization. As a fun little side effect of our specking into the social animal skill tree, we're very good at seeing ourselves mirrored in other people. We have whole parts of our brain dedicated just to recognizing faces and the expressions they're wearing, so we can better determine what's another human to be social with and how they're feeling and whether or not we should be feeling that way too. And because this specific recognition skill is significantly newer, evolutionarily speaking, than the rest of our object recognition, it's got a lot more bugs to work out, which is why we do things like read personalities and moods into animals, car headlights, and rocks. This is called pareidolia, where we see patterns and faces in places where none exist. On the timescale of evolution, we are still quite new at this.
Yo, sex was invented 1.2 billion years ago.
Social animal thing. We're very good at it in small doses. We recognize people we like, feel an urge to be close to them, help them with stuff, support them when they're hurt or struggling, all very good qualities for a communal species to have that help ensure that a group will survive where individuals might not. But the way we define and recognize people isn't quite perfect. For one thing, we anthropomorphize the way we define.
You only feel the helpful drive for your definition of people. Ooh. Well, that kind of, sort of. I don't know. I feel like it depends on the empathy level of the individual person. If I like to think of myself as having a pretty high level of empathy, um, uh, I'm totally unbiased and do not have a massive ego. Um, like, if I had the ability to help people, I'd be helping a lot of people. But yeah, I kind of disagree with this one because, like, I can't think of an example of where I've seen someone where I'm like, I don't want to help them. Well, except for billionaires. Fuck billionaires. They don't need help with anything. They can fucking rot.
Define and recognize people isn't quite perfect. For one thing, we anthropomorphize animals on the regular as soon as they hit a minimum cuteness threshold. And even if we know better, we often can't stop ourselves from assigning a motive or personality or voice to their general animal hijinks, which can lead to us inaccurately predicting their behavior because we're extrapolating from a version of them we've built up in our head that assumes a level of human thought and friendliness.
Oh, you already know what we think about this. This is bait. I wonder how much they pay for insurance on this facility. Oh, according to this article, a lady already got bitten. Also, this article makes it clear the park owner is a Russian businessman with no actual animal handling skills prior to deciding he should commune with lions. And also, the latter half of the article is weird Russian propaganda about how Ukrainian officials are trying to shut down the park because they're evil. For more comprehensive information on why you should avoid facilities that let you pet/handle with cats, see here. Don't pet or go near the big cats. They're big cats. Tiny cats don't even want you petting them. I had a cat when I was a child. Motherfucker, he liked me. I liked him. But let me tell you, there were days where he was like, I don't want to fucking get pet. I'll bite you if you try and touch me. And let me tell you, I would try and touch him, and then he would fucking bite me. Because, you know, he warned me. I didn't listen because I was a child. And he bit me. And I deserved it. And he was a house cat. He was like this like maybe this long. This long of a cat or something. He was a fur ball. A big cat like is like up to here. This is where their head would be, this high up. Don't. What the fuck?
Friendliness in a completely non-human animal. But even when we're just dealing with other humans, we have a tendency to universalize our own experience.
Yeah, I just don't like chocolate, and I'm gay. One of those has got to be a deal breaker.
And then get confused when other people don't share or understand them, and this can make us question if those people are, in fact, people. And as a whole, we are remarkably quick to the trigger on dismissing people as not people, or at least not full, complete, interesting people like us. It's tough to reconcile our inherent sociability with the fact that sometimes people do things that we don't like or can't understand, and it's harder to reconcile that if you're seeing the person as a person just like you, with thoughts and feelings and dreams and common experiences you've shared. It's easier to just conclude that that person is somehow not a person. Only people from your group are people. People outside that group are weird, or jerks, or lesser, or soulless, or monsters, or stupid, or irrational, or anything.
Yes, part of this, I want to know the science behind why the brain thinks this way, because it is something that you definitely have to deconstruct. Because, right, and the problem with this way of thinking is because it then gets you thinking, like, subconsciously you're essentially saying people can't be bad, right? When you have this thinking, people don't do that, right? Hitler wasn't a human, he was a monster. Is very not a good thing to say, because it is essentially disregarding that humanity is not, it's essentially trying to like write off like, oh, humanity can't do bad, humans aren't bad, it's those people doing those things, doing the bad things, they aren't people, they aren't like us, right? Like, it's a thing.
Else that justifies how they are completely different from you, and therefore you don't need to see them or treat them as human. You don't need to apply the golden rule to your interactions with them, and you don't need to feel bad if you do bad things to them. And that's my 2-minute dissertation explaining the history of all human conflict. Thank you. I accept speaking engagements from world leaders and people I don't like very much. But when it comes to fiction, where human becomes a speculative gradient and anything from an alien to an android to a stuffed toy can be a person, anthropomorphization becomes an extremely complicated subject. And in this complicated space is where we find the Pinocchio plot. The premise of the Pinocchio plot is simple, or at least it looks that way on the surface. A character exists who is not human or broadly recognized as a person, but this character wishes to become a real boy. Over the course of this story, they either move closer to this goal or they reevaluate it, and potentially conclude that real boyness is not actually what they want or need. The name of this trope is obviously derived from the story of Pinocchio, an absolute fever dream of a book about a rambunctious living puppet causing mayhem everywhere he goes until he does a nice thing and has his soul removed removed from his lifeless puppet body and turned into a real boy. It's a POV shift from a fairly classic folktale archetype, where a character encounters an animal or monster or other wacky folktale thing, and by doing tasks that prove their moral character, the protagonist is rewarded when the wacky folktale thing in question turns into a beautiful aristocrat of their preferred gender to smooch, and they live happily ever after. The Pinocchio plot instead puts focus on the non-human character as the POV, and in the majority of cases, the character does not start out as a cursed or transformed human, but something else entirely that is seeking to attain humanity, personhood, or realness. Intrinsic in this trope is an exploration of what it means to be human, or a person, or whatever fantasy synonym for human we're going with, because there needs to be something specific for the protagonist to want and strive for. In classic fairy tales, it was common for the distinction to be that the inhuman protagonist did not have a soul, as was the case in Hans Christian Andersen's telling of The Little Mermaid, where the mermaid in question is told by her grandmother that humans live much shorter lives than mermaids, but have immortal souls that outlast them when they die, whereas mermaids just turn into sea foam and are gone for good. By the end of the story, she does indeed dissolve into foam, but her selfless heroism grants her a second life as an airy spirit, and another chance to earn a human soul through 300 years of good deeds. Sounds like goalpost moving to me, but it is what it is. Anyway, more modern storytelling tends to shy away from the philosophical and theological question of the soul, and will instead define humanity in terms of more specific things, like physically having a human body, or feeling emotions, or having dreams, or not being a people-eating monster in some of the more angsty cases. Some subjects of the Pinocchio plot might be eternal children that want the chance to grow up, or precise AI machines that want the chance to experience messy human emotions, or unstoppably powerful warriors that just want to be able to feel pain again. But the fact is, while a lot of these stories get specific about what makes humans so extra special that everybody wants to be one, this rather self-indulgent approach to storytelling isn't really what makes this trope interesting. While some of these characters do get to become real boys trademark, the majority of them don't. It's not something they achieve, it's something that motivates them that they want, or are told that they should want, a form of development they strive for while only occasionally getting to live it. The relationship these characters have with humanity, and what, if anything, humanity means to them, is what makes them interesting. In the original Pinocchio plot, Pinocchio wants to be human because he wants to grow up and become a man. The Azure Fairy lays out everything he has to do in order to earn humanity, which is mostly stuff like being a good boy, going to school every day, never telling lies, finding a job, and other elements of being a good and honest citizen. Pinocchio isn't particularly pleased with any of this, but he works very hard, gets his grades up, does a few acts of selfless heroism, and awakes one morning having transformed into a real flesh and blood boy as a reward for a bad boy becoming a good one, a magical act that also restores his father's youth and cleans up their house. Now, a book that trades personhood for obedience is an interesting concept that several writers have side-eyed a little for the implications, leading to the recent stop-motion adaptation of the story from Guillermo del Toro, a filmmaker whose bread and butter is the exploration of personhood versus monstrosity. Many of del Toro's protagonists are physically monstrous or inhuman beings with good hearts that don't want to change or become human, they just want to be understood and loved. And many of his antagonists are physically flawless human specimens with monstrous interiors that willfully bring suffering to the people around them. His human protagonists, meanwhile, are often outcasts who are seeking the same thing as the inhuman protagonists: love, understanding, connection, acceptance. They don't want to change or to lose what they are, they just want people to stop hurting them for it, a concept that resonates very strongly with a lot of real audiences. So when del Toro decided to adapt the iconic trade your personality for recognized personhood story, he did a little bit different. For one thing, Pinocchio does not at any point physically become a real boy. He does become a better boy. He starts the story a little bit horror movie-esque and has a habit of breaking and disrupting things without meaning to, because he's brand new and doesn't understand the nuances of the world around him, Frankenstein's monster style. In fact, the parallels between Pinocchio and Frankenstein's monster are many and very clearly deliberate. His creator makes him in a fit of madness on a stormy night, and when his creation comes to life, Geppetto reacts initially with terror and revulsion before slowly becoming a better dad than Victor Frankenstein by deciding he can teach Pinocchio to be a better son. The wood sprite tasks the cricket with serving as Pinocchio's conscience and moral guide, because Pinocchio doesn't start off with one of those, he needs to be taught. Pinocchio starts the movie very impulsive and disruptive, but knows when he's upsetting Geppetto and wants to make him happy, which leads to him rather heartbreakingly trying to be the perfect son to make Geppetto stop grieving the mortal son he lost that Pinocchio was explicitly sculpted to replace. This is basically the approach of the original story with a little more knife twisting and dead kids involved. Geppetto wants the perfect son, and Pinocchio wants to make Geppetto happy, so he wants to be the perfect son too. He wants to be real. He is told by Death that unfortunately Pinocchio is not a real boy because Pinocchio can't die, and death is what defines humanity. As he gains more experience, Pinocchio begins to suss out his internal moral compass and
I fucking love Guillermo del Toro. His movies are a bit on the weirder side for me, but the conceptualization and the themes behind Guillermo del Toro's movies are just he's fucking brilliant, man. He's fucking brilliant. Like, it's one of the things that I'm so curious about. I wonder what his because he was gonna do the Hobbit movies originally, and then Warner Brothers was fucking dragging their feet through the mud and taking way too fucking long to get the process moving. And Guillermo del Toro's gotta make money so that he can have a life. I don't think at the time of the Hobbit movies he was that rich or something. I think now I don't know. I don't know what the situation was, but like, or he loves making movies. So he probably wanted to make a fucking movie. WB was taking too long, so he went and made a different movie. And then WB started the process again, and Peter Jackson had to be like, all right, if we're not having Guillermo del Toro do this, I guess I have to do this. He didn't want anyone else to fucking come in and ruin it. Even though then the executives at Warner Brothers came in and ruined it anyways. But the Hobbit under Guillermo del Toro, I'm really curious how that would have been, because that would have been, I don't think Guillermo del Toro has ever done a fantasy epic. So I'm just so curious what that would have been like, because he has a very distinctive style, right? And it would have been distinctive, I feel, from the Lord of the Rings trilogy from the early 2000s. So, I want to know what Del Toro's Hobbit movies would have been like, man.
And what things matter to him, and in the end he sacrifices his own eternal life to save Geppetto, becoming a real boy for the moments he has before he dies for real, until the cricket uses his wish to restore him to life, making him once again not a real boy. Not that that really matters, because the real character arc in this movie is not actually Pinocchio's, it's Geppetto's. Geppetto is the one pushing Pinocchio to be something he's not. The good son, the dead young boy Geppetto has been grieving for years. Pinocchio is not that boy and cannot be him, doesn't even want to be him. But in his grief and anger, Geppetto lashes out at Pinocchio and calls him a burden. This leads Pinocchio to run away from home to try and stop being a painful burden on his father, while Geppetto realizes the full ramifications of what he's said and done, and gets a thorough talking to from the cricket, calling him out for hurting Pinocchio so thoroughly, a boy who wants nothing more than the unconditional love every child deserves from their parent. This Pinocchio is happy the way he is until he's told that that isn't enough, and while he tries to be enough, in the end the happy resolution for his story comes when the person demanding that of him stops. On paper, this is a complete subversion of the Pinocchio plot, since Pinocchio doesn't really want to be a real boy and never even becomes one, but the message it sends is arguably significantly healthier. Pinocchio cultivates his own relationship with humanity, and for him that doesn't mean changing what he is on the outside, and the only changing he does on the inside is learning about the world around him and the people he loves. This is extremely on brand for Del Toro, and the movie is incredibly good, go watch it. So this is
Okay, I was about to ask, for anyone that's seen the movie, is it good? I think it's on Netflix, isn't it? I don't have Netflix at the moment. Fuck.
Solid evidence that the Pinocchio plot is often at its most interesting and compelling when it's being subverted, or at least unpacked. Our habit of anthropomorphization, of seeing ourselves in everything, leads us to readily conclude that it's only natural that everyone would want to be like us, that our way of living is the best and the things that make us happy should make everyone happy. The baseline Pinocchio plot follows this concept to a T. The miraculously magical wooden boy wants to become real so he can get a job and do laundry and taxes and someday die. Who wouldn't want that, right? Or does it even matter what he really wants? That's what he has to do if he wants to be real. The price you pay to be recognized as a human being is to sell off the hours of your precious mortal life in service to a money-making machine that'd just as readily swap you out for any other cog.
Yay, capitalism.
If you want to be seen as an individual, you have to stop acting like one. Humanity! So the Pinocchio plot becomes most interesting when it explores what the character actually wants. If they want to be human, what parts of humanity appeal to them? If they're being guided by humans, what moral principles are those humans trying to instill? It's not necessarily about what the writer thinks defines humanity, but what legitimately matters to the characters, and how they think that relates to humanity. In a lot of modern Pinocchio plots, the only thing the Pinocchio figure seems to really want is friendship, to be understood and accepted by people people who care about them. Sometimes this involves becoming more human, but in many cases it just involves getting better at understanding the humans around them, who don't make nearly as much sense as they seem to think they do. This is also where the Pinocchio plot starts really resonating with certain sectors of the audience, like the neurodivergent crowd, where understanding and parsing certain norms most people take for granted can be a serious chore with a major miscommunication risk. It's also where you start getting the characters who are physically inhuman in some way, but internally are practically indistinguishable from their human friends, and may even be described by those friends as something like the most human person I know, usually meaning that they're kind, compassionate, selfless, and heroic. This is not uncommon in superhero stories, where heroes can be all kinds of inhuman while still being fundamentally good people who display all these good qualities. He may be a god from space, but he's also, a good old farm boy with a moral compass. But what happens once the Pinocchio figure gets past the isolation problem? Let's say this character does have friends and allies, human ones, that'll go to bat for them, respect the bulk of their unique differences, and broadly confirm that they aren't alone. Let's assume the friendship thing is a solved problem. Well, many of these characters will still have internal unanswered questions about their relationship to humanity, and those can be extremely interesting to explore. This is a side of the Pinocchio plot that is most commonly addressed in science fiction, where increasingly powerful technology starts blurring the lines between human and machine. The ship of Theseus problem is a popular staple in these stories. The question of whether an object is still the same object if every part of it has been replaced takes on rather interesting implications when applied to a person being augmented with cybernetics, or copied as a clone, or reprinted cell by cell, or transcoded into a computer.
Reddit's just explaining this so well that I'm just entranced. I'm just enthralled. I really want to, is she going, what? Curious if she's going to end up making any sort of final point here, or if she's just going to be explaining the plot process.
And of course, when the concept of an actual artificial intelligence enters the story, things can get pretty juicy, with terms like sentience getting thrown around pretty haphazardly. Its original philosophical definition just means the ability to feel, but people like using it to mean thinking and self-aware, which would probably be more accurately described using sapience. Anyway, a lot of sci-fi likes to come down on the side of robots and humans are different because robots cannot feel emotions, which is a convenient distinction because it is absolutely impossible to prove in either direction. There's a thought experiment called a philosophical zombie, which posits a being that perfectly resembles and acts like a person, for instance responding with signs of pain when prodded, but internally thinks and feels nothing. It just reacts as though it feels. One angle of the thought experiment is that since we can never know exactly what the people around us are thinking and feeling, it's possible that there's literally nothing under the hood, and we're just assuming.
Oh no, don't. This is gonna make my brain hurt, Red. Don't do this. Don't do this.
That they have a rich inner life because we have one, and they're acting in a way that we recognize. This becomes pertinent when technology becomes capable of convincingly mimicking human thought and emotion, and people start questioning whether human thought and emotion are actually happening. Real-world tech aside, when a sci-fi story presents a robotic character who allegedly cannot feel emotions and yet clearly acts as though they experience emotions, providing special attention and support to people they're close to, prioritizing their well-being, logicking through the process of empathizing with their human friends, and expressing eminently logical reasons to be extra violent against people who have done particularly hateable things. If a character cannot feel or express emotions, and yet at every turn acts the way we expect them to behave if they did have emotions, because things like friendship and compassion and justice still matter to them, it calls into question how relevant visible emotional responses really are in defining the humanity this character seems to embody so well. In fact, this is a pretty logical consequence to the Pinocchio plot. Whenever a writer addresses an inhuman character interacting with the concept of humanity, they make a statement about what they believe defines humanity, and more importantly, whether or not they think that matters. An inhuman character who doesn't feel emotions can still appreciate companionship, or help people in need, or oppose injustice, or otherwise act like a good person. So how much does it matter that they don't feel good or bad about it? Perhaps an inhuman character is incapable of love, and yet in many stories they can still act in a loving manner, supportive and kind, and valuing their comrades even if they don't recognize that's what they're doing, not even touching on the fact that not all humans experience love either. This story, intentionally or not, makes a statement about love's relationship with humanity through this inhuman character. In some stories, the inhuman character can't age or die, exploring how mortality and the constants of change defines humanity. In many Pinocchio plots, the character gets a taste of the facet of humanity that intrigues them, and in many cases, they don't like it. The formerly unemotional character finds themselves far too manipulable by ephemeral feelings. The previously immortal character figures out that they don't like pain and that aging is scary. The soulless character faces whatever metaphysical repercussions accompany the abrupt acquisition of a soul. But then again, for some characters, it's just what they needed. The immortal character finds new value in a life that changes every day. The unemotional character sees everything familiar in a new light when colored by how it suddenly makes them feel. Different writers come to different conclusions about humanity, and different characters want different things from it.
And that is what makes writing and all of that so fucking beautiful. And why like, if you are ever, it's one thing, it's a hard thing to always remember. Every writer struggles with this. This also gets into the point of imposter syndrome, and you got to remind yourself of this exact point. What Red is saying right here: plots, tropes, they've already been done, right? There's a reason tropes exist. It's because it's what us humans like, right? The stories that exist and that are popular, right? They're popular for a reason, and they all share a lot of similarities. However, it is the combination of things and your interpretation of these deeper questions that then make the story special. Right? This, like, stories like The Hunger Games, that's a story that's going to last for a while because it has a deeper interpretation of society, of deeper, harder hitting questions like this, and the human experience, and how different people deal with trauma and war, and all that. But then there are stories, that I'm not going to name names of stories, but there are stories out there that do not hit those deeper questions, or even ask them, or maybe they don't even like try. They just want a basic story written out, and so they don't hit hard. To help with imposter syndrome, just remember your interpretation of the things you're writing about already makes your story unique. You really do not have to try that hard to make a unique story. It really isn't that hard. It's just that once you start writing, you're noticing the similarities um in the tropes you use, in the similarities in the progression of the acts, of the flow of the story. But those similarities exist because they are, one, the story that you enjoy already, right? The stories you enjoy reading are going to also be the stories you tend to write. Uh, like, I love fantasy. I love fantasy, and kind of like um self-doubt protagonists. Guess what? What my stories are then? You look at my shelf, you're gonna see a bunch of protagonists that are self-doubting, fantastical protagonists. You look at my stories, what are my stories largely? Who tends to be the central protagonist in my fantasy stories? A person that is doubting. Because I find that to be the most interesting to read. Thus, it also becomes the most fun for me to write, the most enjoyable for me to write. That does not mean I'm copying the people that I've read. I'm definitely stealing things from them, right? I'm stealing ideas from them, but I'm putting my own spin on it because of the lived experience that I have, as well as the combination of all the stories I've read. The combination of stories that I've read are entirely different than the combination of stories that those authors have read, which is how they came up with their story, because it was the combination of authors that they read, who then wrote their stories because of a combination of stories that they read, right? So that's one. and I still suffer from imposter syndrome constantly. I constantly am self-doubting my stories and my writing ability. But this here is a very important message that goes beyond, I think, the Pinocchio plot and just applies widely to writing and to just trying to not let the imposter syndrome affect you too much. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. Best-selling authors deal with it all the time still. But they learn to control it, to be like kind of like brush it aside. They learn to deal with it. And be like, "No, I'm not an imposter. I'm telling my stories. I'm not telling another person's stories. I'm telling my story." I think that makes sense. This would be such a good moment to end on, but we still have like a minute or two left in the video.
Space this philosophically dense, there's no real right or wrong answer, just the potential for a lot of extremely interesting stories. At its core, the Pinocchio plot encourages a human writer and human audiences to ask one key introspective question. Do humans need to be this unique, special, shining species on a hill for everyone to aspire to be? Does humanity work as a standard against which all worth is measured? And in the more compelling stories, the answer is usually no, because when the answer is yes, that's where the conversation just stops. When a character ends the story by becoming a real boy trademarked, it's a statement that humanity, as the writer specifically defines it, really is the ideal state of being that everybody should aspire to be. A story that unpacks what concepts are picked out as defining humanity and explores how those traits do or don't actually matter to the inhuman characters trying to understand them is a story that can have almost infinite philosophical depths. And one thing that a subversion of the Pinocchio plot can be uniquely good at communicating is that humanity does not need to be this perfect, ideal, ultimate life form in order for humans to be worthy of love. Everyone is worthy of personhood and self-determination and love, no matter how human they are or are not, and no matter how well they line up with the ideas of humanity. A subversion of the Pinocchio plot says that people get to define who they are without having to conform to a rule set to do it. So yeah.
And that was Trope Talk Pinocchio plots. Going into this is not what I was expecting to be hit with. This was a fantastic episode, despite it being perhaps a trope that I guess I'm well aware of that I just didn't realize. So yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.